Everybody. Welcome everybody for this session. We are about to start. We are quite some people in the same room here in IDH office, so sorry for a little bit of noise that you might hear, but we should be set up completely in few minutes. So let me welcome all of you to this session. Is the IDH Climate Action Library event. So we will have almost 2 hours session today, and we have some people that decided to join us in person, so that's why they are in the room with us today. But the majority of you opted for the online connection, so we also adapted the meeting for that. So my name is Sonia Cordera, and I'm the Director of Sector Initiative at IDH, and I will be moderating today's session with you. So before we start, please note that the session will be recorded. So the goal is really to share this session with as many partners as possible, really to inspire them and hopefully stimulate further actions in the supply chain. And I will welcome all of you to open your cameras so that we can see each other. That will be nice also to try to have a bit interactive session if possible, and if you are comfortable, of course, with that. Please take care of your microphone that is muted during the session if you are not intervening or speaking. And in worst case scenario, my colleague Christina will mute you if we hear a lot of noises disturbing the session. I would also encourage all of you to type your name, but also the name of your organization if possible, so that we know and everybody knows who is online with us today. So thanks for this. The agenda of today looks like as you see it on the slides. So we will have a short introduction and presentation from my side, and then we will go into hearing from 3 companies, 3 speakers, talking about their climate action that they have been taking or about to take in their supply chains. So the speakers come from different sectors. So we will have Blumenwald from the flower sector, Seafresh from aquaculture, and OFI from spices. After that, so we will have a kind of 15 minutes for a presentation and then 10 minutes for Q&A. So also please note down your questions and share it in the chat so that we can really have an interactive session with the speakers after each case study is presented. After the 3 cases, we will have the launch of the Climate Action Library website, and my colleagues Jessie will guide us through it. And then a little bit of an interactive session also with you to hear about your feedback for today's session, and then a closing. In total is 1 hour and 45 minutes, and we really aim to finish on time. So let's see. What is the objective of today? So first of all is really sharing best practices on climate action in international supply chains. As we know, that's also quite challenging at times. And the aim is really inspiring other companies. So sharing best practices to inspire replication or further action of others. We want also to provide insights on how climate action can benefit or not also the economic position of a company. And then last objective is also, as mentioned, to really launch the resource, so the website that we have been working on, so that you are aware that that exists, and then you can also use it later on to find out more information about the next cases that we are planning to share. But before we move into it, we have all to go through the competition law statement, and you please have a look at the slide. So basically, we need to all to be aware of the restrictions of competition law. So there shall be no agreements or concerted actions that may restrain competition. There shall also be not any exchange of commercially sensitive information concerning individuals' prices, rates, coverage, market prices, claim settlement practices, or any other competitive aspect of an individual company's operation. Finally, all of you, please speak up immediately in case you think we are falling outside these bounds. So raise your hand or interrupt the session, please. So thanks and welcome once again, all of you, but especially I want to give a little bit of background or who we are and why we are all together here. So as you can see, there are 5 initiatives that have been invited with all their members to participate today. And why? Because all these initiatives that we are collaborating together as IDH are all working on climate action, even though at different levels. So CFAV is the Sustainability Initiative for Fruit and Vegetables. And CFAV has already a clear defined targets for all its members by 25 to reduce the greenhouse gas emission on 25%, specifically on 3 products. They have also specific targets for food loss and waste, as well as water management. And the members of CFAV are right now done the 2nd year of reporting on also data regarding environmental footprint in their scope 3. And some of them are using also a tool that we have developed together, which is called Environmental Footprint Tool. And others are using other tools that are available on the market on their choice. Similarly, the Aquaculture Working Group has also similar targets for 25, so reducing of 25% the greenhouse gas emission on 3 products as well, and they are also in the 2nd round of reporting this year of this data. And here the majority of members are also been using a tool that was developed by the initiative in collaboration with IDH, and actually are about to further develop the tool into a digital one. We have also members of the FSI, so the Floriculture Sustainability Initiative, which also has ambitions to meet the Paris Agreement goals by 2025. And then we have with us also members from the Sustainable Spice Initiatives and the Sustainable Juice Covenant. Both the Spice and the Juice Initiative have currently active groups, working groups on climate action. Are piloting different tools to help members measuring product environmental footprint, and are also discussing targets for 2030. So welcome to all of you. And we are really have decided to organize this session today because we really want to move to go the next step. We have been spending quite some time with all of you on measuring, also developing these tools and setting up common definition. And of course, measuring is important, but what we want to do today is really talking more about action, so that giving space for your company directly to inspire and tell us your learning or challenges that you have encountered. Why we are doing this, and I think this is probably obvious to all of you that are connecting today, but basically we have to really accelerate our reduction effort on environmental footprint for food. We know already that we are gone beyond the safe limits of 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries. And so far, looking at the past, we have not made enough collaboration to address the topics on climate risk. So it's really important that we stay focused and collaborate together on this. From IDH, with many of you and a different initiative in the past 2-3 years, we have been working on trying to set up a clear roadmap, we call it, on better environment. So really define 5 simple steps also to guide us, focusing on the different action that any company needs to take care of. And the first one is really identifying, right? Also at sector level, what is the challenge? And then define the ambition. What are we trying to achieve? Then the second is start measuring to assess the environmental footprint, the current one for a product, for the sector, or as an individual company. The third is also to verify those data. Is not enough just to collect data that are just self-reported, but would be very important, even though very challenging as well, to try to audit and verify this data. And then fourth, of course, is where we are focusing today. So taking action and as individual company or as a sector to really monitor the reduction journey. And then the fifth, very important, which is just not linear, but actually apply at all levels, is always share learnings. And that's also why IDH is involved, is really to promote this to happen and hopefully to really inspire all of you across the different sectors. So the call is really the collaboration, because as you all know, upcoming laws and legislations and requirements are asking companies to go beyond their own facilities when they think about overall environmental footprint. So it's important to look at your supply chain, to go in mapping the supply chain, and then to track also data coming across the different stages. In this slide, you see some examples of climate actions. I will not read all of them, but these are coming out of the different case studies that we have so far collected through the initiatives I mentioned before. Some of them are already very well documented, so are the 3 case studies that we will be hearing from today. But there are many others that are already shared, but needs to be further polished and complete before we can then publish on the website. So we aim to get many more cases, of course, so please also think about that, but we will explain later on better the options also for doing that. But before we go there, I want to ask my colleague Victor Dagnelli, who is Innovation Manager on Better Environment, to help us a little bit with the jargon we will be using later on. So just to be sure we are all on the same page. So Victor.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. I'm a bit further from the mic. You can see me on the camera. So just to get everyone on the same page, nothing is more annoying than a meeting where all kinds of jargon and words are thrown around and nobody really knows what they mean, or some people don't know it. So I'm going to cover a few of the basics. The first one is around scopes. So scope 1, 2, 3, which is a technical term, comes from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And it basically just tries to explain for an organization how directly in the sphere of influence are my emissions. So scope 1 will be very much directly related to the company's sphere of influence. So when you own or control a source, what is the emission from that? For example, if you have a fleet of trucks that do transport, what are the emissions related to those trucks that you actually own? Scope 2 is a bit more indirect, so it's the emissions from purchased energy, which could be electricity or steam or any type of energy source that you have, which, dependent on where you actually buy your energy from, will be green or gray or some emissions attached. And then scope 3 is everything else, which is a lot because it's in the entire value chain, both upstream and downstream. So upstream, it might be related to farmers, producers, all your suppliers and their emissions related to certain products, and downstream it's on even the waste management of where do the products go, where do they end up, and what emissions are related to that. The next division I'll talk about is on the one hand organizational footprint and on the other product footprint. So organizational footprint is really the carbon emissions, all the emissions that can be attributed to a certain organization, and that can be scope 1 or 2 or 3 depending on what you want to do. Whereas for product, it's really, well, the same type of thing. What are the carbon emissions that can be attributed to a certain product over its entire life cycle? So important for these two are two things that there is some overlap between them, but they also serve different purposes. An organizational footprint you will do mostly if you're a company and you have, for example, a net zero commitment. This will be useful to track how is my company actually on track for that. Whereas a product footprint is more detailed on a specific product. So you know exactly where the hotspots and you can compare different products within your portfolio. So they serve slightly different uses, and also there are actually different rules to these two. For the first, there might be a very detailed greenhouse gas protocol that you have to follow. For the other one, there's maybe a life cycle assessment methodology. So there are rules where you have to comply to actually to make it work. And then third, which we'll talk about for sure, is the difference between primary and secondary data. So primary data is if you gather your emission data, or if it is gathered directly at the source. So it could be, for example, producers at their farm, they measure how much fertilizer are they using. And then from the fertilizer, you can figure out how much emissions are related to that. Whereas secondary data is more of an estimate on emissions because it's deduced from other sources. It's not directly measured. You might have a national average, or maybe there's a report on US corn farmers and how much fertilizer they're using on average. You can also, for some of the protocols, use that secondary data. But obviously, then it's not directly related to your own supply chain. You will not see whether you're better or worse or improving over time necessarily. And of course, next to these, I'm sure there are many more jargons. You have things like SBTi, LCAs, greenhouse gas protocol. I'm not going to dive into all the details now. I think you can also pop questions in the chat, and I'm sure someone else will be happy to answer.
So thanks, Victor, for this. I think it's very, very helpful. So as mentioned before, we are going now to hear from the three speakers from the flower and plants sector. So with Bloom and Wild, from the aquaculture working group, with Seafresh group, and from SSI with OFI speaking. But before doing that, we have a little interactive poll question for you. So you should be seeing soon, you see on the slide, the menti.com link, so that you can use with the code, where you can type your answer to these simple questions. Is helpful for us to get a little bit more of a sense of where all the companies are in their journey on climate action, and to better understand also, of course, your interest also for future sessions and so forth. So it's a simple one in a way. It's only this question for now. We will have others later on. But if you can try to go to the website and type in, will be very helpful for us. I can see already many of you doing that. And currently, so the four option is not yet. So I haven't started as a company at all. Or an option is saying, yes, I have started, made some step on calculating scope 1 and 2 and reduction on level scope 1 and 2. The third option is, yes, scope 1 and 2, but also 3, especially at organizational level. So as just mentioned by Victor. Or the fourth option is, yes, I've been doing 1 and 2, but also 3, and I'm working at the product level. So going really specific on the product, I do trade or I do produce or sell, depending on your company profile. But I think we are getting quite a lot of answer, and I see that the majority is actually already on scope 1 and 2 and 3 at organizational level, but some of you haven't started yet, and some of you are also already work at product level. So it's a quite composite group of companies we are here today. Thanks for this. It's helpful to know where we are. So said this, I think I will move on to the first case. So we have Bloom and Wild that will be talking about their case study on flower bouquet carbon budgets. And we will have with us Sibbe Kroll, who is Director of Sustainability at Bloom and Wild. Sibbe, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to meet you. My name is Sibbe Kroll, indeed, from Bloom and Wild Group. And you might know us from our brands Bloom and Wild in the UK, Bloomon in the Netherlands, and Bergamot in France. And we operate in 9 markets across Europe. We're also a certified B Corp. And we've engaged with a lot of NGOs, academia, and other stakeholders to really understand what is our impact as a company and how do we operate as sustainably as possible as a part of our B Corp commitment also. And climate always comes out as one of the key big topics that we need to take action on, which I think probably everybody on this call already recognizes because you're either already active or at the very least you're on this call. So of course you also want to know more. And so happy to share more about how we've worked on being carbon neutral with official carbon neutral certifiers and experts, and particularly how we've made a lot of reductions in our carbon footprint using carbon budgets. If we go to the next slide, then what you'll see is that we have a couple of key objectives. One of our objectives is to halve our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030, and we want to have reached net zero, a 90% reduction by 2045. So ahead of the 2050 deadline, essentially, that we have, if you look at the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change guidance. And the way that we work on this for our scope 1 and 2, we have an absolute reduction target, with one that we've already achieved actually for 2030 when it comes to achieving a 50% reduction. But like most businesses, for us, the big challenge really sits in our scope 3. And there we have a target to reduce our carbon footprint on a product basis following the Science Based Targets initiative guidance by reducing 7% year on year. And the way that we do this is really on a data-driven approach, integrated in our day-to-day operations from all of our teams, especially our procurement teams and our other buying teams, who of course have the most direct control over what happens in our scope 3. We of course do this also with our business partners, with our suppliers, with whom we have built up good relationships over many years. And together as an industry, we can therefore take an ongoing long-term approach to tackling this. Good question. Our baseline year is 2020. Tamas. If we go to the next slide, there's kind of a step-by-step approach that you can see here, although a lot of this also, of course, happens in parallel. But I think taking you sequentially through how we've gone about this, I think this is a helpful way of looking at the steps. The first thing is, of course, getting that baseline in place. So for us, that's 2020. Gathering emissions data for the flowers, for the raw materials that we use as a company, to understand what is our carbon footprint, what is our baseline, and where are also the hotspots, and what are then the opportunities to tackle these. We've used that to create a data system to store the emissions data. So we have an individual carbon footprint per flower stem per country that sits in our bouquet management system, our BMS, with which sustainability, but also procurement and other teams all work. And that actually helped us to create carbon budgets, looking at the historic carbon footprint of our products and how we can make reductions in line with the Science Based Targets initiative to make sure that we stay on track of hitting our reductions in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. We have then used these carbon footprint data to create also then budgets, and therefore also procurement plans that actually look not only at financial budgets, but also these carbon budgets. So it's also made the work of our buyers and our designers initially a bit more complicated, looking at not just design principles, not just quality, vast life, and financial considerations, but also these carbon considerations. Although we've also seen that very often these things dovetail or overlap in very beneficial ways, which I'll come back to in a moment. We've also worked on step 5, building, of course, these relationships with growers to get the data. This is something that didn't just start at the start of this project, but this has been happening in a long time already. And this is something that we've continued to cultivate, that we will continue to work on. Yeah, I'll come back to this in a second as well. But again, Thomas, for your other question, what method have we used to establish emissions data, a bespoke tool or else? So we've used a company called Sustainalyze and also ERM, sustainability experts, together with our auditor, Climate Neutral Group, to make sure that we have good quality data, and using methods like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and using mostly eco-event data, or indeed a bespoke tool where we could get more specific by having specific data. Liz, on your question, yes, we are planning to recalculate the data when the Florip FCR is more mainstream. I'll share a little bit more on that in a second as well. But for people who are not familiar with the floriculture sector, there is a new tool that's coming up. It's been launched since February, but it's still being fully integrated into the systems of life cycle assessment providers over the ongoing months, and hopefully that will be finished by this summer. But yeah, I think this is maybe hopefully a helpful step-by-step approach, kind of looking at, okay, start with the baseline, start with gathering data. Also in parallel, but when you have the data, especially set up a system to understand how you can create carbon budgets and how you can start to plan for reductions year on year. Then, of course, work with your teams and with your suppliers to enable those choices and to see what opportunities are there for solutions. And at the end of the day, we're also looking at what we can communicate and how we can engage customers to understand what's happening. Because there's a lot of scrutiny of the flower sector right now, and maybe rightly so, although at the same time, we believe that there's a lot of really good things happening in the flower sector as well that we can be quite proud of, and that we just need to make sure that we surface to people in the right way. And also, of course, that's helped with FSI, the Floriculture Sustainability Initiative, who helps organize this call. If we go to the next slide, I think some of these things are briefly mentioned or I brought up because of the questions here, but we look at a 7% intensity reduction in that sense. So looking at the product reduction, so 7% less emissions per bouquet. We share also therefore what kind of example footprints we see, and what you can also see is that there can be quite big differences between stems. And what we really see is that if you take an Alstroemeria in this example, so a flower that's grown in a heated greenhouse in the Netherlands, then that typically is the highest carbon footprint that we get. So the ones that have traditionally heated greenhouses, they tend to be the biggest carbon footprint. Then whatever you ship from further away with air freight tends to have the second highest, but a lot lower already. And whatever you can get grown locally or grown relatively nearby that only needs road transport, that can have the lowest carbon footprint. However, this is also going to change. We see already that some of our suppliers are switching over to geothermal heating, or that they use other ways of innovating that actually makes the heated greenhouses the most sustainable option. And this is still quite rare, but there are big plans underway in the sector to drive this at a much greater scale. So if we look at what we can do right now, what our designers and buyers also can do is that we can look at different ways to mitigate our impact and lower our impact where we can. So in times that can be substituting one flower for another that has a much lower carbon footprint. It can also mean sourcing from a different country than maybe we did before, or looking for other means of transportation. And one thing that's also quite promising is that more and more flowers are coming our way using sea freight rather than air freight, which is also at times as much as a 92% reduction in carbon footprints, very significant. Right now, the security situation in the Red Sea has unfortunately given us a bit of a setback there, because right now it's very hard to get flowers from East Africa, for example, via sea freight. But ultimately, we see for the long term that this is a very big potential unlock for our sector to further make reductions. If we go to the next slides, cost and benefits, we do think that there's obviously some costs related to this, but they haven't been enormous. We're quite lucky in the sense that as a company, we have quite a big focus on building our own systems, having a lot of data, and therefore we have quite a good tech team that helped us build the bouquet management system, the BMS, that stores a lot of the data, that does a lot of the calculations in-house. We haven't really quantified that. I think it would also be difficult right now to go back and fully quantify it, because a lot of the work intersects with activities we probably would have done anyway. But in terms of out of pocket, it was relatively affordable to actually get really good baseline data and to build a tool that helps us work with suppliers in calculating carbon footprints. We've also seen a lot of benefits. We've seen that the carbon footprint of our bouquets has gone down year on year. We've been hitting our targets, our reduction targets. Customers definitely also appreciate this effort that we're undertaking. We also saw that actually having good insight in the carbon footprint of our products was very helpful in mitigating impacts during the energy crisis from 2 winters ago, which actually meant that we had a lot better continuity and a lot less supply chain issues than some of our peers, by already understanding where would be the pain points because of the outsized use of fossil fuels that we see. And we also see that it helps bring about other innovations and solutions that we hadn't initially thought of. And we see that it really is also valued by our teams, and that it helps us in attracting talent, which is also quite a challenge in the current economy. If we go to the next slide, what I think is also important to note is that, there are obviously sort of ongoing challenges. It's quite a big leap really to get going with collecting data. It can also take a lot of conversations with your suppliers to get data in place. I think also importantly, and I think this comes back to your question, Liz, we also need to make sure that we keep in line with what good looks like and what best practice looks like. So we right now use a bespoke method, our own tool, based on what we think are the best practices that are out there right now, but still it's our own. We're quite happy that we've done this because initially we were thinking about waiting for the FLORI PEFCR, the category rules that the EU has developed for the floriculture sector, before we would start on our way. And it was predicted to have been done 3 to 4 years ago, and ultimately it took a lot longer. So we're happy that we've made our way on the journey and have started making a lot of reductions on the back of that. But now that the FLORI PEFCR is so close to being rolled out in the sector, we're quite keen to switch over to the FLORI PEFCR data. So the most detailed data that will be then available about the products in our categories that we can use. There are some additional challenges with that. So I think the EU method requires companies to share 3 years of data. We sometimes even see that 1 year can already be a challenge for people to really have their hands around. So we'll definitely see some adoption issues, and it will take some time to get going, but hopefully that won't take too long. And one other challenge that we see is that we shouldn't focus only on carbon budgets by themselves, fully in isolation, because we know that they don't give us the full picture. They could also be still lots of challenges around the social sustainability, around other biodiversity implications. And so having only a binary approach that only focuses on carbon misses sometimes the mark of the bigger picture that we want to take a look at. And right now we're working on that in different kinds of ways to make sure that we have other safeguards alongside with what we're doing. I think what we've learned is that, probably the data that we have in our systems will never be perfect, but it's definitely good enough to be directionally correct and to start going and to start making changes and to have a very positive impact. And I think it will always be work in progress. So I think it's important not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and to make sure that we get going and that we take positive steps together as an industry. I also think it's really important to make sure that you understand that it's something that you can't achieve by yourself. So we've taken a lot of time to have a lot of conversations with suppliers and with experts to understand how we can do this and how we can work with people as much as possible, and also help enable action in their end by making available, for example, free tools or guidance on what we think good could look like. And therefore also together understanding what are hotspots and what are possible solutions of making those go away or mitigating those as much as possible. So really that's in a nutshell where we're at with our carbon budgets. So yeah, it's now been a while since we've launched them, and fortunately we've hit our targets now a few years in a row, but very keen to see how far we can take this to get even more granular and specific data with the EU PEFCR, and keen to keep working together with a lot of our colleagues and peers to see a transition happen in the floriculture sector. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll see if there's any more questions.
Thank you so much, Sibe, for the very nice presentation, clear, and sharing your experience with all of us. I see some question popping in the chat. Use biofuel in the airplanes for Kenya, Ethiopia. Can you compare with sea freight? Can you answer this, Sibe, or?
Yeah, I could take a pass. I'm not an expert on biofuel in and of itself. I think there's a couple considerations that we do need to take into consideration. I think already biofuels is being mixed in within aviation fuel to a certain extent, and we still see that there's a 92% reduction in the best case, 84% in the lower case reduction when using sea freight over air freight. So I think there is just a very significant, sometimes 10 times as big a difference, which I think will be very difficult to make up entirely with biofuel. I think there's a couple of considerations. One is that it's not always certain that biofuel itself is that sustainable. Sometimes it's made not with waste products, but with actual ingredients, which therefore can have a very negative impact on land use, which therefore means that the carbon footprint isn't significantly lower sometimes than fossil fuels that are being input. And I understand there's also a lot of technical challenges that biofuel burns almost too clean in a way, which therefore is an issue for airplane engines, because it needs a bit of that oily kerosene to actually keep the gears moving and to make sure that it's actually fully optimized. So I think, yes, there's definitely a potential for mixing in things like biofuel, especially if it's made in a sustainable way from waste products, to further lower the footprint of aviation. but I don't think it's going to give us the same kind of an unlock that sea freight right now promises to deliver for the sector when we talk about transportation from further away.
Thanks, Sibe. Please, all of you, feel free to type questions in the chat for Sibe so that we can take those. In the meantime, Sibe, maybe from my side, because as IDH, we collaborate with these different initiatives, and we see that the majority of companies really find it very challenging to gather data from their suppliers, from producers. So what do you do to, first of all, incentivize your producer to share data with you, but also to maybe, you mentioned, right, the connection with your procurement team. Can you share a bit more concrete actions that you do?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, sort of going back to the beginning, I think we're also lucky in the floriculture sector that it's quite a traceable, quite a transparent sector. I think the fact that we have such a central auction in the Netherlands that has brought a lot of the players together has a lot of spillover benefits like that. So we, from the beginning, know all of our suppliers. We know where our flowers come from. That's obviously a very important first step. And I think our procurement team has done a good job in also cultivating a lot of relationships very directly with growers. So not overly relying on traders or only using an auction, but actually knowing where does it come from, who grows our flowers, and how can we work with them. So that also creates a deeper relationship, which also gives then a starting point for these sometimes more challenging or just a bit more, yeah, sort of out of the blue conversations that might not come up from other customers for our suppliers. So I think it's been quite an important part of the process, making sure that you have those relationships, invest in the long term, and have broader conversations about where you see that the sector is going. And I think once we sit down, it's very often, you know, if you have a cup of coffee with people and you talk about why we're doing this, why we think this is important, some people have a very intrinsic motivation like us to actually go after this. Some people see also that the sector is under scrutiny and that's only going to get bigger. So we better start having our own response and to lead in this airway before we are fully led by others. And so often when you have these conversations and you take time together, there's often a lot of common interest, and you can from there start to build an approach. But yeah, you have to really make sure that you also have those long-term relationships, because if you're just coming in from a transactional approach and you're demanding things, yeah, I think it's a very ineffective way, and very often probably not going to be delivering good results for you if you want to engage with your supply chain that way.
I see a question for you.
Yeah, Claire, there's a question about a trade-off between quality and carbon footprint if we use sea freight over air freight, and an increase in chemicals. So that's an interesting question. So I think, yes, that was the big fear, of course, that, you know, sea freight can really take quite a long time. It can be as much as 28 days, which for a fresh product like flowers is very, very long. At the same time, it's really all about temperature hours. So if you have good control of your supply chain, you have a good cold chain, you harvest the flowers, you cool them down, ideally on site the same day, and they go in a refrigerated container from the farm all the way to the Netherlands or Belgium or where you ship them, then you might actually have better quality flowers using sea freight than you get from air freight, where there's more fluctuations because they get repacked, they get into warehouses, they get into the airplane, they get repacked again. There's more handling, there's more fluctuations. And so if everything goes well, we've now seen quite often that sea freight quality can be better than air freight. The use of chemicals is not necessarily higher, although there can be certain flowers that are treated with a dip, and that dip can be made of all kinds of different components. So nowadays there are quite sustainable, good quality dips that you can use that avoid botrytis, a kind of disease that can otherwise come up in the container. It used to be also done with dips that contain silver, for example, or the other kinds of heavy metals, which definitely had a footprint. Still probably not enough, anywhere near enough to offset the gains you make in the footprint, but still, of course, something that we want to avoid. So fortunately, when it comes to quality, there's no longer a big trade-off unless something goes wrong along the way. And in terms of chemicals, I think there's a lot of advances being made, actually, especially quite recently, to stay away from the use of heavy metals or other kind of chemicals that will be needed to make sea freight work.
Any other questions for Sibe? Feel free also to unmute yourself if you want to intervene. Silence. So I go with another one, Sibe, before we move on to the next case. You mentioned, right, the importance of the sector dynamics and, of course, the infrastructure logistics. But what do you see? What would be helpful, or what is the role of FSI as an initiative for helping a company like yours, right, into this journey?
Yeah. So I think FSI has traditionally FSI has had a big focus on really building in a good foundational level of sustainability in the sector by focusing on social and environmental and good agricultural practices certification, which I think has been extremely helpful. And I think in more recent years, FSI has rightly picked climate as a bigger topic to dive deeper into and to see how to prioritize that around different kind of projects, and also supporting that European Union project of creating the FLORIP FCR, the category rules for a very robust calculation of a carbon footprint of a flower. I think having supported the FLORIP FCR and also therefore kind of helping with converge the industry around that standard, I think that's really important. And I think that will probably continue to need the work of an effort, but I think that's already been very helpful and important. I think a next step is to understand how can we, especially also sort of led by FSI, coordinate as a sector as these data points become available and the sector works together on rolling out the FLORIP FCR to get really good carbon footprint data per grower, per stem. And I think there's a lot that we could benefit from if FSI can help avoid that it's not every man for itself creating its own database or doing its own calculations. I think if we can create a common data set, or at least an exchange where all the different kind of LCA experts who can do these calculations can feed data in together so that data sits in a central place, and then obviously the grower or whoever supplied the data keeps owning the data, but they can then share it with different customers, different auditors, different partners who might need that data at some point from one central hub, so that we don't have different customers asking the farm to do all kinds of different calculations or their own take on it, but actually a central platform that minimizes the amount of measurement and monitoring that's done and maximizes therefore the conversations kind of beyond that about what we can do to address hotspots or how to make positive change happen in the sector. And I think FSI is uniquely positioned to help make that happen, so that we keep the focus on really impact rather than measurement alone.
Thanks. So definitely, I think exchange of data also between competitors, if you want, in this case, is very important, right? And you mentioned already twice, I think that is a very sensitive topic also for the industry, who is really also aware of the risk involved, and important to keep the reputation. So thanks for sharing.
Sonia, if you allow me, Tony Brugging here, I chair FSI. And first of all, I want to thank Sibe for the very clear presentation. But on the last subject, I think where FSI also can play a role with the national organizations, and it doesn't matter if they are in the Netherlands, in Colombia, Ethiopia, Kenya. And that discussion we take also with the verification, with the standards, is growers put their data. But also the national organizations can use these data to create information for the growers at location, at crop, where am I? Yeah. Am I better? Do I have to improve? But the data will give them that information. And I just came back Saturday from a week in Kenya with the KFC, the Kenyan Flower Council, organizing also a conference on sustainability, just on these matters. And there's a big demand for that. And to the other sectors, the flower sector has also very good in-country organizations and standards which gather data. They are used to gather data like Flor Verde, Kenyan Flower Council, MPS in the north. And there are many data points which can be connected to the benefit of the sector. And that, I think, is specifically for the growers. And that's what we also want to use towards 2030. and with FSI also use where other sectors are moving. So where groups like SSI or CFAF are moving, a lot of problems or a lot of issues are comparable, and we like to learn from the differences. So where others are better, we would like to use as a flower sector. We also like to give back to the other sectors. So, and that's where IDH towards 2030 can play a good role, I think. And we also take up these discussions with IDH, especially on the environmental footprinting, because we really hope that IDH also there wants to play its role. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony and Sibe. Yes, I think the floriculture sector has this particular component, right, of having national organizations who are also managing some certain schemes. So they really have an opportunity also to help the sector transition this phase with data management and exchange of data, as Sibe mentioned. So thanks to Sibe for now. I think everybody feel free to still ask questions for Sibe. I believe you can then address them in the chat in case, Sibe, or later on as after this.
Yep, thanks, Sonja.
Thank you so much. We then move on to the next case, which is the one from CFresh Group on carbon reduction at processing site. So I welcome Luis Catani, who is aquaculture and fisheries biologist at Seafarm, who is the group under CFresh. And CFresh Group acts with different roles in the supply chain. So is also a producer, but of course also a trader and a processor themselves, and sells in North America, Europe, and Asia. Luis, the floor is yours.
Hi, Sonja. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as mentioned, Luis Catani from CFresh Group, or Seafarms within the CFresh Group. And yeah, we'll talk about carbon reductions at processing site. I'm going to go to the next slide. So some key objectives that we took here were really to, well, reduce the carbon footprint of the product, which is why we're all here today, and reducing the carbon footprint at the site level. And so that's warm water prawns processed in Thailand. And then also a further objective to try and reduce some operational costs at CFresh as well. And the approach that was taken to do this was installing solar panels on top of some of the factory roofs on site, and then replacing a large biomass coal boiler for two more efficient fuel A boilers. If we jump to the next slide, we can delve into it a bit more. And as Sonja touched on, we're an integrated supply chain. So this is a warm water supply chain, say, and we've got feed and hatcheries. Those are third party, but then CFresh own the farm, the processing site, Seafarms, which is sourcing office here in the UK. I'm based in Redditch, just south of Birmingham, out of interest, and the secondary processing, which is also on our site here in Redditch, and then that goes off to a retailer. So all of these actions are based on the primary processing site in Thailand. And we started with number one, that was replacing an inefficient biomass coal boiler with two smaller fuel A boilers. Now, to some, a carbon reduction by replacing a biomass boiler sounds counterintuitive, but this was a very large boiler which could be run off palm kernels. However, there was issues in supply of the kernels, and so that had to be substituted with coal sometimes. And then also the way the boiler was designed, it had to be run at full capacity when it was turned on, and so any fluctuations in supply, be that an energy demand rather, be that seasonal or throughout the day, it couldn't be tailored to it. So you just had to run this thing at full volume and pack it out with coal if there were supply issues. So switch that to 2 fuel A boilers, and really able to drive some efficiencies in steam production for cooking. If we go over to number 2 now, that's a third-party energy company actually covered all the costs of the solar panels. So C-Fresh identified their roofs were strong enough for 4 solar panels, but through this method, they didn't need to install. They didn't cover the capital expenditure, and then also all maintenance and installation costs are covered. What C-Fresh does do is purchase the renewable energy off this third party, and it's at a fixed rate lower than the grid price. It's 24% lower than grid price over the next 15 years. And at the end of the 15 years, they'll be able to purchase the panels off this company. I suppose to touch on the capacity of the array, and C-Fresh's demand means C-Fresh take 100% of the energy, and I think that should do it. So if we move on to the next slide. What we've got here are so the total emissions for processing sites, this was in 2022, was 8,500 tons of CO2, and we saw a 44% reduction in this, or rather it's semi-theoretical because the boiler replacement is done off using primary data and a bit of an estimation. We used 2022 data for what was fuel usage and then switched it over. So it's it's best. It's a good estimate. And we have the solar panel usage. Energy supply of the solar panels was 2,500 kilowatt hours, which comes out at 1,255 kilos. And then so a key point to pull out of this slide is site level footprint, 44% reduction. That's very satisfying, ticks all boxes for most people. But product level footprint, this only resulted in 3.7% reduction, which is simply because it's not where the hotspot lies. But it's interesting to think, you can reduce your site level by 44%, and it's only impacting 3.7% of the product footprint. But good reductions all the same. If we push on to the next slide. So some cost and benefits for C-Fresh. The boilers, this was covered by C-Fresh, the capital expenditure, with an annual saving from using less fuel, purchasing a different fuel but using less of it. So they're saving annually a 5.7-year break-even period. And this cost per carbon reduction unit, this is per kilogram of CO2, you actually save $0.0046 over the lifetime of the boiler. And then the solar panels, seeing as no capital expenditure or maintenance or any investment required, the annual saving is purely from this reduced price, 24% lower than grid price, and that's your nearly $100,000 a year saving. So if I think we push on, I suppose that covers that. To reflect back on it a little bit, primary processing was a focus because it was under the sphere of influence of C-Fresh, and so we thought we'd start where you have control. The board of directors were the ones that actually identified the opportunity to engage with these third-party energy company, incentivized by a very high price of grid electricity in Thailand. Hence, they went looking for alternatives and found this third-party solar process. And then the old biomass boiler, as I mentioned, it presented the challenges of supply of biomass and an inability to run at a reduced capacity. Hence, again, looking for alternatives. So, and then internal buy-in and mobilization of capex. That was demonstrated by the dual benefits of carbon reductions and operational savings. So, yeah, reducing carbon footprint and costs, I'm sure everyone can get behind. Challenges along the way. There was one delay in receiving the new boilers, but in the grand scheme of things, it's installed now, and I think it's telling that the only challenge we could think of is there was a delay in finding the boilers. Shows that this was pretty successful. These were some successful actions. Some learnings and recommendations. So reductions in emissions often coincide with reduced costs. This is something that Sibe also commented on, and it should just be a further incentive that reducing carbon emissions can go hand in hand with saving costs. So seeking out these efficiencies, seeking out new technologies, they should eventually pay back themselves as well as reducing the carbon footprints. This third-party solar model was very successful. C-Fresh has already initiated a second project. So they're going to be expanding their arrays in 2024. They're looking at it for the farm. It seems to be a really good model, and they're happy with it. And finally, increased efficiency is key in reducing emissions. This boiler output now being tailored to production needs brings about all of the savings. Really, that's what it's being driven by. So I think that's me done, and we can open the floor to questions.
Thanks, Luis. We have two questions, quite specific on the chat. I'm not sure if you can read them directly. Otherwise, I go to the first. With liability on maintenance, repairs, but also disposal of the panels once they reach their end of life.
So maintenance liability, that's the third-party company. I understand there's a 15-year contract, and all installation costs of the panels and maintenance is covered by them. Now, their disposal at end of life, as I understand it, there will be an opportunity to buy the panels off this third company and start using them. I think potentially. I'm not sure if they could they'd ever be able to sell the electricity to anyone else. But I think it's quite well established that this third company allows you to buy them off them. So Andy P, what's Fuel A? It's just a hydrocarbon fuel. Like diesel, like petrol, which is quite common in boilers, and simply a hydrocarbon. And I understand Fuel A is the actual term for it. We kind of questioned it at the beginning, but it's called Fuel A.
Thanks, Luis, for this. So I see the other question also is going a bit there. So basically, we know, right, and probably also for your on the environmental product footprint, as you also show, this was not your hotspot, right, to take on. So can you say something about that, and what are your plans towards really focusing on those hotspots that you have identified, which is feed level, for example, right? Maybe you can give a bit more.
No, absolutely. You're on the money. That isn't the energy use at processing level, at processing site, isn't the hotspot, hence reducing it by nearly 50% only reduced 3.2% reduction. But so as Sonia says, we feed use in shrimp aquaculture, feed is your lion's share of the carbon footprint. Currently the soy that has been used isn't verified DCF, deforestation free soy. That's a big thing at the minute, and that's adding a land use change bump of several kilograms of carbon per kilogram of shrimp. So purchasing verified VDCF soy, that's a big tick box which we're already going through. So that involves talking with your feed suppliers and initiating a conversion plan for them to source only VDCF. That can be verified through certifications and traceability studies that you send out well, traceability, I'm sure everyone knows what they are. And then secondly, we've got a few projects at the farm level, which is quite exciting. And the big thing is how do you improve? So you change the carbon footprint of the feed, but then how do you improve FCR as well, your food conversion ratio? So if you can use the same amount of feed and produce more shrimp, or you'll use less feed to produce the same amount of shrimp, you'll reduce your footprint. And so currently an issue with the system is they don't accurately understand the biomass of the pond, and you feed relative to the biomass on the whole way. Like as they get bigger, you feed more, but you need to understand how much is in your pond. And there's new sonar technology that can be used to more effectively know the number of shrimp you have, and then you're feeding the correct amounts. And so we're hoping that's going to bring out better footprints. And then also it's a recirculating aquaculture system. So you're reusing water, cleaning it, filtering it, cleaning it, all this. And there's new, more efficient water recycling systems that we're looking to implement as well. And the solar panels, as I mentioned, hoping to install the solar panels. But there's in conversations with those, you need to hit an energy consumption per month for it to be worth their while. So it's not a universal just click and implement this solar panel thing, because obviously there needs to be benefit to this third company. So, but yeah, solar panels, change the feed to deforestation free, and then improve your food conversion ratio by improved water quality as well. So if you have a better system, the shrimp are happier. It's all about trying to improve this feed conversion ratio. Is Fuel A more or less carbon intensive than biomass? Yeah, so Fuel A is in fact more carbon intensive. So if you burnt a kilo of each, you'd prefer to burn a kilo of biomass, but it's the fact that this large boiler was so inefficient and you had to use so much of this biomass, and you couldn't tailor it to production, and sometimes you couldn't find it, so there was coal going in. I hope that covers that. Is there any more questions?
Let's see if there are any questions still from the group. Please feel free to raise your hand or unmute or type.
If you don't mind, I would like to dig in more in my initial question on the solar panels, Luis. I think it's a really interesting model, but there's two questions for me. Number one, is the production of the solar panels taken into account, all the energy that they use to produce them? And then when they reach the end of life, they need to be disposed, recycled, and all that, of course, is out of your calculation, rightly so. I understand the idea. But if you see it as a holistic approach, is there a risk that actually we say, yes, that's amazing, but actually it's not as good as it looks?
I do see your point. I mean, I suppose as I understand it, with the product footprint, Like, are you including all the materials in every stage? I don't. Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting one. I'm not sure I have the answer to it.
I think it's a tricky question. I'm looking at Victor here in our room if he has something to share on this.
I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I think the question will be valid for any solar panel pretty much anywhere where they will replace fossil fuels. So I'm sure there's research, right, on what is indeed the life cycle of a typical solar panel and how much percentage is that in replacing fossil fuels over its lifetime. And I assume, like, I know some numbers with electric vehicles, for example, which are actually much more positive than you would think. So I would guess that the same applies for solar panels. So it's like maybe indeed it does reduce the numbers that you have in front of you by 10%, maybe even 20%, but I would guess it's that order of magnitude and not more.
Yeah.
Thank you. And sorry, Luis, it was not quite a fair question to you. It was more out of curiosity.
No, but thanks for sharing, Ben. And I believe these are the questions everybody face when trying to start moving steps. What I like, Luis, is 2 points also from your presentation. One is really the connection with other topics that also Sibe mentioned upon, right? So you work on green gas emission reduction, for example, but the connection with water can be very important, right? Recycling and the quality. Or Sibe mentioned also other subjects like social, etc. That are related. I see something from Tamas. Yeah, it's related to the solar panel, I guess. So it's important to investigate, right? When making a deal, I think, with that company producing solar panels, also on the details of what they have produced. Thanks. Maybe then a question still for you, Luis. What are your next steps as a company? Like, if you look at the future 25, 2030, this was an action, right? I'm so glad that also you were open to disclose these details. We have seen that it's not so easy also to find companies that are happy to share this detail with us. So first of all, thanks, because that's here this kind of discussions, right? Which is much needed. But can you give us a little bit on an overview on what are the next steps you're planning to do?
No, of course. Yeah, I mean, you're very welcome. I think this kind of industry collaborations and sharing, and it's all about yeah, learning from each other and being inspired. So you're very welcome for that. But as for next steps, well, it's just continuing engaging with suppliers throughout the supply chains, and also trying to into I want to say push, but I don't think that's quite the right word, to get them to develop and own and proactively make their own action plans. And so, I mean, I know there's platforms like M2030 that suppliers are being asked to join, and they have an action plan that you can you list out what your actions are and how that's going to achieve it. And we're doing that. We're reaching out to suppliers and asking them to think what are the actions that you've already done in the last few years and could do to reduce the footprint and get everyone thinking about it at all levels. And then, yeah, touching back on feed being the shrimp's hotspot, we've engaged with the feed suppliers in all supply chains. And yeah, so it's how are you reducing your site footprint, but your sourcing strategies. So I suppose the next steps will just continue to work with suppliers, looking for funding, because yeah, I mean, I think funding, who pays for all these major fantastic new technologies? It can't all just sit with the farmer, and little small independent shrimp farmers. It's simply not possible, and it's going to be the same across all these sectors. And so there's funding that can be found from customers and NGOs, and it's seeking out these fundings, starting projects, having collaborations like these, and I think it's just, yeah, you're on the journey now, so just keeping it moving and keeping that same excitement for it.
Thanks, Luis. And I don't see other question in the chat. So my last one will be, you are with us in this phase, right, of trying to digitalize currently the tool, and you have been using the environmental footprint tool developed with the aquaculture group. How do you see that as how is this helping you basically as a company?
Well, I think it was quite a steep learning curve, requesting all this information for suppliers, both for them and for us, and us trying to process it. I think now that all our suppliers are engaged and understand what's required of them, having an online tool that we can both kind of go in and out and input data, have it all a little bit more simplified rather than sending back and forth Excel templates which are locked, so you can't highlight cells in yellow, and you have language barriers. I mean, the Excel, it works very well and the tool was wonderful. It's allowed us to do all this footprinting, and the development of the tool itself is something that would certainly deserve IDH's to sing the praises of you guys and the aquaculture working group. But an online tool would just make it work all a bit more smoothly. I think, that's what I'd say.
Thanks, Luis. Thank you so much again for sharing with us your case and your learnings. And I would like to move to the next speaker. And again, feel free still to share questions to Luis also directly if you want, and he can handle those now or later on. So thanks again. And I would like to invite Claire from OFI to take the floor and talk us a little bit more about OFI Regenerative Agriculture Program.
Great. Hello, thank you for the invitation from IDH and SSI. It's been fascinating to learn about environmental actions being taken in other industries. So to start off, just really appreciate the invitation. Thank you. My name is Claire Loudis, and I'm here representing Olam Food Ingredients, or OFI. And for those of you who don't know, OFI is an ingredients company. So we're focused on 5 commodities: cocoa, coffee, dairy, nuts, and spices. We work with nearly 3 million farmers globally across 50 countries, sourcing ingredients in different capacities, so different structures. We farm ourselves, we own different estates across these different ingredients. We work directly with farmers, or in some situations, aggregators, and in other supply chains, we're traders. And then we process in origin with more than 100 processing facilities globally. So moving on, thank you for changing to the next slide. I'll talk about, I'm embedded in the spices business. And so my examples will be specifically around how our decarbonization and our environmental solutions or projects that are focused on meeting our OFI goals around environment and carbon. So if you look at the key objectives at the top, these are 3 of our OFI very ambitious goals for 2030 as well as 2050. And we actually just released our sustainability ambitions publicly recently. So get in touch with me later if you'd like me to share some more details on that. These are just 3 of many. But the ones that are relevant today are, like many of the companies here, we want to achieve net zero by 2050. We want to support bringing 2 million hectares under regenerative agriculture practices. So that's about the size of the country of Costa Rica. And then lastly, engage in 20 living landscapes. And how we define living landscapes are projects and programs that are too big to do on your own, and have a triple, so you need to bring in multiple stakeholders, whether it be governments and farmers, communities, nonprofits, customers, and then the projects need to have three positive outcomes. They need to support the environment, they need to support farmers, and they need to support communities. So as you can tell, we're really making an effort to kind of, as Sibe sort of alluded to kind of avoid this carbon tunnel vision and be a little more holistic. So making sure in our ambitions and our projects that we're also considering biodiversity impacts and community impacts, social impacts, things like that. So the two projects I'll focus on, are the two case studies that support these higher level goals, are our Regen Ag program. And so we're doing this across all of OFI, of course, so in all of our different supply chains. But the one I'll focus on is in California in our onion and garlic operations. So we're doing different practices that are aim to improve soil health by reducing synthetic fertilizer and increasing soil biodiversity with applications of biological agents, things like that. We want to improve on-farm water use efficiency with different technologies there, and enhance on-farm biodiversity. So that's both above ground and below ground, as I alluded to with soil health. And then increasing on-farm energy efficiency is another category of activities. So that could be, we've talked a lot about fuel. So in this scenario, it could be about renewable diesel or maybe some forms of biodiesel, solar installation in some areas. In other areas, maybe it's about wind. And then, or just multi-use tractors, for example, so reducing passes on farm. And then maybe surprisingly, maybe not, but another way to have a big impact on this is through increased yields. So you're using less for the same output, for example. And then our second case study, and these two are linked. We're trying to tell a story about the larger landscape and then also how we can improve these outcomes on the farm. So this example is, the second case study is about landscape scale meadow and forest ecosystem restoration in the upper watershed. So our region draws 70% of the water from the upper watershed. So the forested and meadow region, 70 miles from our growing regions. And we've partnered with government, with the US Forest Service and the National Forest Foundation, as well as customers like Knorr, Unilever brand, to conserve the forest nearby that provides these crucial resources to our farming downstream. And so we are working with them to remove encroaching invasive species that are inhibiting the meadow and the forest from acting how it would naturally act to hold more water, to sequester more carbon, and then deliver that clean water downstream to our growers and also to our processing facilities and also to our offices, and then the communities who rely on these water resources as well. Another co-benefit is that a meadow and forest that are acting as they should in a correct ecosystem prevents these severe wildfires that we've been having in California for decades and have just been getting bigger and hotter and spreading to communities, so detrimental to air quality. We have the highest rates of asthma in our region. And then, of course, to safety of our community members, of nearby towns and things like that. Okay, so here I'll talk a little bit about how these projects are financed and the very specific kind of beneficial, I'd say, seat that OFI is in, because we do work directly with growers. And so this is the case for both our landscape level projects, this forest and meadow restoration piece, and then also our regenerative ag projects on the ground. So basically, we source directly from our farmers. So we have really close relationships with all of our growers. And so that allows us to identify opportunities for impact. So we can work with our growers and understand, oh, these are the problems they're dealing with. And because we have two proprietary tools, our @Source platform, as well as our carbon scenario planner, and then sensors that I'll get into as well. We're able to identify, to translate those opportunities into what the carbon benefit might be, or the greenhouse gas benefit. So @Source is our platform where we collect data from growers, and then we use that to basically develop a baseline or an LCA. So instead of using EcoInvent, for example, we're getting direct data from our farmers, and then we can calculate a greenhouse gas and a water footprint for a region, or for even a specific farmer, based on how we collect it in this specific supply chain. And then we can use that. We kind of cross-analyze or discuss with our growers, or use our own internal expertise to understand which regenerative practices are relevant to those growers. And then we can use our carbon scenario planner, as well as the @Source footprint, to estimate what the potential reduction might be for implementing that regenerative ag practice. And then the third tool we're using to measure the reality on the ground, is we have sensors that measure above and below ground carbon in the canopy, and then as well as the soil, to kind of gauge whether our carbon scenario planner estimates are how close they are, I guess, to reality. And so that's our relationship with the Regen Ag projects and our growers. And then, because these projects are very expensive, we depend on like-minded customer partnerships. So customers who have similar goals around greenhouse gas, similar ambitions around biodiversity and regenerative ag, will work with us to co-fund some of these projects, and we'll share those learnings, and we'll report out using our @Source and our carbon scenario planner tools, as well as some of the data that's coming from these sensors. And then similarly, because we want to move into a more holistic approach and understanding of these very complicated ecosystems, our landscape level projects are funded in a similar manner. And so our customers will come to us, or we'll come to them with these opportunities and explain the context, explain the benefits, and how our farms don't just operate in isolation, but in fact, they're dependent on these resources coming from the upper watershed, and we need to work to restore those as well. So the beauty of regenerative ag and regenerative agriculture practices is that they are meant to be flexible, and they're meant to adjust to different contexts. So these are just two examples of some of the activities we've done in our Regen Ag program, and some of the benefits that we've found. And so they're not necessarily reproducible on every farm, because maybe a farmer doesn't want to do this on every farm, or because of the crop. But many of them are. And that is a sneak peek. That's a challenge that we're working on, is making sure that we maintain the flexibility of regenerative agriculture, but are able to scale it up. But one example here is applying animal-based compost fertilizer, which was a larger story, because we had to make sure that it was rigorous in terms of food safety, and update our food safety protocols for growers, and speak with our customers, and make sure that it was safe and would maintain quality, and then allow our farmers to apply the animal-based compost fertilizer onto their onion and garlic fields. And what we saw from this, and this is also based on our carbon scenario planner tool, was a 15 to 20% reduction of onion and garlic emissions during production stage. And so this outcome is based on all of the different variables that go into @Source and go into this carbon scenario planner tool. So they consider chemical inputs, fertilizer and pesticide, and how that might change, as well as the intensity of the creation of those fertilizers and pesticides, if that makes sense. So before it's even applied on the farm, what it takes, how much energy it takes to create those products, those inputs. So that is a consideration in this reduction, as well as if we're not over applying it, if we're applying less of it, or none of it at all, then what is the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions there? Because based on our initial at source baseline for this growing region, the biggest impact comes from fertilizer creation and over application. So that's why we targeted a project like this. The second piece is around drip irrigation. And what we did for this example was we worked with growers who had drip irrigation buried very deep in the ground because they used it probably around a foot, and they used it for a different product because we're in a rotational system. And so that system was using more diesel and more water to bring the water from the buried line up to the root zone of the crop. And so we worked with them to do a different, more shallow drip irrigation system. And in our pilot, we saw 70% diesel reduction compared to this baseline, and then 42% reduction in water usage. And so we're going to scale up that activity to all relevant farmers and have a bigger, see bigger results as well, and be able to really understand them. So those are two of the examples of within our Regen Ag program. Cool. And then the next piece is for the Meadow and Forest Restoration Project. And these are very clear. They've been calculated by our expert partners at the Forest Service and the National Forest Foundation. The National Forest Foundation is a group that was created by Congress to facilitate interactions between the private sector and the public sector. And so what they did was analyze or understand our project activities, and then quantify the benefits in terms of carbon and then water replenished. And the carbon benefits, interestingly enough, are basically because some of the activities do include prescribed burns. So it's a little bit surprising to see a carbon benefit, but it's because with these severe wildfires, once they hit, these areas are more likely to grow back as a different ecosystem. So to grow back as shrubland, for example, instead of large old growth trees that sequester more carbon. And so this is part of the benefits that's seen in protecting these forests and maintaining them. The water reductions have been calculated using the volumetric water-based accounting methodology, which was developed by WRI and other stakeholders. And this is a lot of these benefits. The biggest dollar per acre benefit we see is through meadow restoration. For water. And so they're all calculated, or that one's calculated for the annually over the next 20 years. And then other benefits I sort of alluded to earlier, but are, maintaining access to recreation, reducing the spread of wildfires, and improving air quality. Another thing is, in order for the implementation, we partnered with a native tribe called the Big Sandy to do all the implementation. And so that's where the community piece comes into play as well. So just before we move on, to make clear this connection, because it does seem, it can seem like I'm talking about a bunch of separate issues, but really what we're trying to do with these two projects is paint the picture of how our landscape supports our farming, and how the two aren't separate. Environment is not separate from farming, and biodiversity does not only need to be considered on the farm as well, but including the surrounding regions. So if you think about, we're increasing the total amount of water in the system through these meadow and forest restoration programs, and then we're connecting that to the farm with water reduction programs around drip irrigation or improving soil health so there's better water retention, and so on and so forth.
Thanks, Claire. I think this is very important also, this connection again, to exit that tunnel of just looking at carbon only in isolation. We have still a couple of slides, but also quite some questions. And maybe can you try to finish the slides quickly, and then we take all these questions I see in the chat.
Sure. If you want to move forward, I think we're almost done.
Yeah, please.
So the initial motivation or the discovery of this project is a thread of this whole meeting, as we've been talking a lot about the importance of industry collaboration. And so we are in a group called the California Water Action Collaborative, where we basically meet. It's cross-industry. It has non-profits, corporations from all different industries, and then government organizations as well. And so we meet and we discuss. We understand better the problems with California water through expert speakers from government, from water organizations, things like that. And then we also understand what solutions exist. And so that's how we first heard of these green water or nature-based solutions compared to maybe some of the gray water solutions that we've been looking at before. So that was our initial motivation. And then, of course, because we have these ambitious targets set for ourselves around landscape, 20 living landscapes, and then 2 million hectares of regen ag as well. And then the connection between greenhouse gases is we're hoping that all of these, or carbon, is that all of these projects allow healthier soils, that sequester more carbon, and then the very tangible benefits from the forest. And so that is what supported internal buy-in, and then seeing alignment with like-minded customers. And so being able to share the cost and then also create that customer stickiness. Internal changes needed were really just beefing up our capacity, because it is a lot of work to implement and to track and to monitor and report on these regen ag programs. And then challenges at a field level are we're an annual crop. And so we change fields every single year. And so it is hard to report and measure that progress field over field. Again, holding the two things at the same time, which is the flexibility of a regen ag program and then the need to scale up. And then this is I think this one might be an interesting challenge for many on the call, where because this project is on public lands, you can't claim the benefit that towards your SBTIs for the carbon reduction in the forest piece. So that's something we're trying to navigate. Next slide, please. Really, from this, the thing I would take away is the importance of customer and expert partnerships. So it's valuable in understanding and being able to quantify the real impact in funding. OFI is in a very lucky position, I'd say, where data collection is always hard. We've talked about that in with the different speakers, but we're in a little bit of a lucky position because we have these long-standing relationships with our growers. So while it's still very hard, it's slightly easier because we have worked with our growers for generations. And a challenge is that these are expensive. These programs are expensive, especially when we're talking about California and the United States, and figuring out how to finance them and how to lower the costs and scale up in the future is a challenge. And customers and other corporations are interested, it seems, in paying for the projects, in cost sharing the transition, but not necessarily paying more for what could be a sustainable product. And then we also want to be able to continue making thoughtful business decisions, but be able to support the growers who are working with us and our key sustainability partners. And so that's kind of an internal challenge or an internal negotiation that we're working on. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Claire. And we are a little bit on the edge in terms of timing. I don't think we can take all the questions that you see in the chat, but maybe we can take a couple and then you can try to answer maybe writing, or otherwise we follow up later on with the replies to all of them. But maybe I think what also I think it's interesting to, if you can share a bit more, is how your customers, right, are really supporting you through these projects. You say is a cost sharing of the project, and is isolated, or is the majority of your clients? Can you give us a sense of what is the size of this?
Sure, it's definitely isolated. For now, it's mostly the CPG organizations, the ones who have these really ambitious public goals. And in my, shorter career, I'd say, I guess, for now, or early career, I've already noticed a change in how they choose to support us, and it's really welcome. It's through a lot of flexibility, and so it's this trust that the growers and ourselves, who you might be able to tell, sort of consider ourselves growers as well, that we understand what is best for our system. So we understand which practices would be most beneficial to yield and to our soils and to things like that. And so we're noticing, I've noticed already a change from just these are the activities we'd like to see implemented and this is the cost for them, to more, what do you think is necessary for your system? And then let's negotiate the costs and how we'll measure those outcomes and how to report it, which it's still a challenge because everybody wants something reported differently. And that's a lot of time for the growers as well as our sustainability teams.
Yeah, no, thanks, Claire. And this is helpful, I think, also looking at more broadly, also from SSI perspective as well, that alignment, right, on data format, it's fundamental. And good to also hear that you see change. And of course, those companies that you mentioned basically are the one who will start, right? And hopefully there will be a bit more cascade effect later on with more and more following.
That would be great.
Yeah, maybe there is I take another one because I think it's interesting, and it's all the scaling. How do you see in the future OFI being able to scale this from really a project base into something more structured, or what are the challenges at least?
Yeah, and we're working on that now, but how we're thinking about it is basically identifying a collection of practices that are relevant to a specific region. And we have to keep our head above water because it's so easy to get more granular than region, or to just dive deeper and deeper. But to identify a collection of maybe 4 or 5 practices, and then many of these practices are also what our state and the government are incentivizing through the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, or the California version of that. And so to understand what they're reimbursing for these costs, and most of them focus on smaller farmers. We do work with larger farmers. And then also having a incentive for performance built in. And so maybe there's a reimbursement to growers, and part of that is for them providing data as well as doing the activity. And so it'll be based on what the understood cost for the activity is. And then if we apply those sensors in the field, which we have been doing, then having an additional premium for, and we haven't decided on these thresholds yet, but for example, if it meets a greenhouse gas threshold, or maybe it's a soil biodiversity threshold of number of species in the soil, and then there could be an additional payment to the grower that way. And then all of this cost will be bundled for a volume of product. Yeah, and linked to a product.
Thanks, Claire, for considering the time. I think this was very, very important because, of course, it's also the procurement practices, right? And how you incentivize also the grower to work with you through this. So thanks you so much. And please have a look at the questions if you want to directly to typing. Otherwise, please connect with Jessie. I'm sure we can share your replies later on.
Thank you.
Then I want to invite Jessie to guide us through and talk a little bit on the website.
Great, thanks. So thanks all of the free speakers who are very active in the past month, to give us the case. So we are very pleased to announce the launch of this website, which we will share in the email following up. Basically, where our aim is to capture all of the cases that is in this website. So if you hold over, each case, then you can download the PDF. And our plan is where coming onwards every quarter, we would like to expand the library by inviting more companies to get interviewed or to invite you to polish the cases. And hopefully by the end of the year, we can have at least like 20 cases for across sector. And also just for an update from Comms Team IDH, they're actually renewing our IDH website. So in this autumn, around September and October, you'll see new sections, which is resources from the new website, where you can directly search related themes. So for instance, we'll have this regenerative agriculture themes where when you click on it, it will just basically cases that's related to it. So it's easier for you to search. And of course, as a next step, we really encourage all the companies to come to us and say, you know, we have taken actions, so that you are happy to be interviewed with us or not, then you can start having this climate actions. And I think the next is on having more
Yes.
interactions.
So thanks, Jessie, and especially to you also for the work with the website, and not only Jessie, but also the other colleagues collecting these case studies. But we would like to hear quickly from you on how you find the session today. So again, you can share your feedback through the menti.com. I think it's the same link, Chris, that we shared before.
Okay, sure.
And then shortly we should be seeing your replies to this. So we see things moving, at least it seems helpful, which is good for us, but this is important. So be honest and don't shy away. This is all really confidential, but it's helpful also for us to think about how to structure the next sessions and so on. So thanks. I see still some change there. Then otherwise we can move to maybe the second question. And this, I think we have a couple of questions which are open. So what will you suggest in making this library more helpful, useful, relevant for you? So any idea, please again, share your suggestions so that we can take those in consideration. There is a bit more time, probably because you need to type in. And maybe while we wait for this, I'm just opening also if there is anybody from the steering committee or the different initiatives that have been collaborating that wants to share anything. So please feel free to also unmute yourself and directly speak. I see many coming, so case study should be elaborative. Oh. And then we have shared tools. We heard a lot of tools mentioned. I believe this means also being more transparent on which tool are being used. Of course, we can send the slides. Definitely, that's, I believe, not a problem. Provide as many practical tips as possible, more business cases on different sectors. We are working on that, so we hopefully get even more cases. I see the Menti on that side, so I cannot read. But maybe, Tomas, from your side, if you can share something with us.
Yeah, so I'm just too lazy to type in with my hands. I thought I would just interject verbally. I think it's a great initiative. I would like to thank IDH for facilitating this, and also the guest speakers for sharing their examples that we can all learn from. I suppose as we are going to enrich and fill this library with a lot of other similar case studies, it's important to make it searchable. So tagging and using metadata is going to be crucial. I also would like to kind of have some executive summaries and maybe just summarize the learnings, the best practices, and the potential pitfalls for each case study. So if someone wants to have a quick look and they search for a specific topic, they will see that at the, let's say, the cover page of these case studies. And I suppose it would be nice to set up like a system where those who would like to be notified once a new case study has been uploaded into this library, they are informed about this so that they can go in and have a look to make this library really live. And I don't know if this is the plan or not, but it would be also nice to create something similar for other topics that would be like overarching industries, like living income, for instance, would be for me also similarly relevant and important to all those stakeholders that were listed at the very beginning. So yeah, these are my immediate impressions and thoughts. But overall, I think it's a very good initiative, and knowledge sharing is going to be key.
Thank you so much, Tamas. And I think you had also very specific suggestion for us, so that's really good. And we will take those in consideration, definitely. Do we have another question still?
Two more questions.
So the next one is also, what kind of cases will you like to see presented so that you can learn in the future? And after this, we have last question, right? And then it's done. So bear with us for a few minutes more, so then we can get your feedback fully.
Sonia, maybe
Yes, Sonia.
because you asked from the sector initiatives, maybe from FSI, we had an interesting discussion last week on, starting from a life cycle analysis, you set your priorities, and based on these data, it can be different. Say, if you look at where you start with reduction. So, for instance, in the northern hemisphere, of course, heating is a big issue. If you look from Kenya, for instance, to Europe to the market, it's logistics is the main point. But on most cases, solar panels are, for instance, being used. But in Kenya, 93% is already green energy. Yeah. So how does then a solar panel actually contribute in carbon reduction? So you get all these kind of questions, and I think that would be finding these right pathways, coming from life cycle analysis, what kind of recipes we use to make decisions, where to start. I think that sharing between on a platform like this, between sector initiatives and where producers and traders are located, the end product is used, could also be of great interest for participants. And maybe another one is that the sector initiatives have, in many cases, also national organizations or sector organizations as a member, but not the individual growers, or even if they are small or large scale. So how do we reach them? Can they get access? How can we do that? Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. Also noted these suggestions, and I believe more and more cases, more and more companies will share with us cases we can do this next level thinking, really. So identifying then pathways for reduction, sector specific, but also across sector would be also definitely interesting, and hopefully get into the level Tamas was mentioning, right, with the possibility to really quickly identify and presenting the specificities. Wow, I see a lot of ideas, but basically Scope 3 emission comes twice. I think water, complex supply chains are also of interest. I see again measurement and methodologies, so probably also again getting back to tools, and also manufacturing companies, right? Okay, I think looking at time, let's go to the last question. So, and this is also something maybe for you more, Tony, Tamas, and the rest of the also boards and steering committees. How can the sector initiative you are engaged in support you in taking climate action? Is there something that this initiative can do to help you more than what they actually are currently doing? And with this, then we close the poll.
You asked how the sector initiatives, Sonia, can help and the different, well, using the differences, yeah, because sometimes one sector initiative was faster than the other, so we get examples from other and approaches from other sector initiatives. So sharing that between this large group of companies, which are about 400, I think, it would be a big help. Data and having our 2030 targets on these key points and sector, especially on the footprinting aligned, that would help as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and we see data definitely, I believe, coming from these responses as well. So having more access to practices of others. So the sharing opportunity, right? So that companies can learn from each other directly. Industry data, collaboration between members, I see, and then funding opportunities as well. Development of common methodologies and specific sector working group to help companies. Maybe Tomas, then a concluding remarks from you, and then maybe we can close.
Yeah, I will leave the conclusion to you, but just another recommendation or something to think about. So learning from each other is fantastic. I suppose collaboration among platforms, not just within, but across platforms, would be even better. And I suppose in this regard, IDH is uniquely positioned because you host a plethora of similarly minded sustainability sector initiatives. And based on my experience, there's a lot of potential for synergies between, let's say, the spice industry and other industries who would engage, in some cases at least, the same group of smallholder farmers at origin. And that would help companies like SSI members and members of other initiatives to share the investment required to fund these initiatives, but also to share the positive externalities. We do know that many, let's say, vegetable farmers rotate their crops in conjunction with spices and vice versa. Maybe there are some other opportunities to collaborate where we would need to kind of incentivize or guide the farmers. But I think this is something that we should also proactively look at and try to exploit.
Thanks, Tomas. And this is an important point, and that's also why we try really to bring all the different companies and initiatives that we support as IDH together in this session today. But in general, right, working with this website and resource. So thanks for all of you. We are over time, but we have still the majority of you there. So thanks again. And I want just to close quickly, inviting all of you to really think about what you have been doing. If you are ready to share something with us, just reach out to your contact in this initiatives. So CFAB, FSI, SSI, the JUICE Covenant, so that we can work with you to prepare a case that can be published online soon. And as well, of course, start talking about this topic, not only within your company, but with all your actors, right? In the supply chain, as we said at the beginning, is really a collaborative effort that needs to be set in place. So thanks again for being with us today. And yes, I wish you a good continuation of the day and to be in touch. Thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.